Today, I'm going to share a short clip from Aaron Siri. He's a lawyer in the US. He is well known to the vaccine discussion. He has a whole litigation firm that focuses primarily on vaccine injuries. He's not very well liked by the pro vax community. However, he was integral in forcing the FDA to release the data from Pfizer that was going to be kept for 75 years. He has challenged hepatitis B vaccines. He has been on many things that a lot of people don't like, including, I think, he litigates for ICANN. I can't remember what ICANN means, but it is primarily targeting vaccines generally and whether or not appropriate safety standards had been met. So you can imagine that this guy is not one who is particularly liked by the scientific community that is promoting especially COVID vaccines. So in this presentation, he was speaking to the US Senate committee, and I thought this was so well delivered and so clear that it was worthwhile listening to as I make some points around it, just so that you understand the challenges that we're facing at the moment in relation to what is happening around the pandemic. Many people think that the pandemic is behind us, and so therefore, why worry? Even if there are mistakes, no big deal. My view is very, very different. I am extremely concerned because the virus is still circulating. People have had immune priming through vaccination, and this was not a circumstance that was really well considered. What happens when people get reinfection after reinfection in a situation where the immune system has been primed by a vaccine? That to me is pretty serious. And so, therefore, we still have to address all the things that happened in the pandemic. But let's get back to exactly what he was saying, and I'll make some points around it.
Our vaccine practice, I believe, which has over 40 professionals, it doesn't represent pharmaceutical companies, I believe is the largest vaccine practice in the world. When we litigate vaccine cases, we cannot rely on credentials or fancy titles. We have to prove our claims with high impact data and sources. For example, I saw a slide put up that showed 3 million lives were saved from COVID-19 vaccines. The citation to it was to the Commonwealth Fund. If you follow that, that's not a peer-reviewed study. That's a blog. It's a blog that used a mathematical model to calculate that 3 million lives were saved. So I agree with the Senator Blumenthal who said, quote, claims made, I think you meant regarding vaccines, we need to examine the evidence. And that's an example of that. We need to look carefully at the evidence we are relying upon when we are making claims about vaccines. I don't think that if I went into court and I was relying on a blog that used a mathematical model, I would be laughed out of court if I was making those claims about vaccines. But unfortunately, when it comes to promoting vaccines, well, that's what we often see. The underlying data is not typically really carefully evaluated. Claims about what vaccines do when they're positive, because our health agencies are responsible for promoting them, easily made. Claims that vaccines cause any harms or injuries often get ignored no matter how good.
I'll pause that here a minute because he's made an extremely important point. When we look at the COVID pandemic, and I'm not speaking broadly about vaccines, based on the interactions I've had with many virologists, vaccinologists, many of the, especially the live vaccines, have tremendous value in stimulating the immune system. But we'll not get into that argument at the moment. But specifically with regards to COVID vaccines and the 3 million lives saved, or the how many millions saved based on mathematical models, the premise is very simple. If all those lives are saved, you expect to see a fall in all-cause mortality. And if you don't see that, something is wrong with the analysis. Very simple. I recently came across a paper that spoke about how many thromboembolic events, strokes and heart attacks, were saved by the vaccine. And again, my principle was simple. If this is accurate, I expect to see a pattern in highly vaccinated regions where you have a significant fall off in these events. If that doesn't happen in the real world, then it suggests that the science is faulty. Similarly, if you were to argue that so many lives were saved by the vaccine, I would then want to look at all the lives that were lost in low vaccination regions. If you don't see, similarly, a huge loss of life in areas like Haiti, Papua New Guinea, Madagascar, if you are not seeing a significant drop off in terms of mortality in those regions, you have to go back to the science. And the science has to make sense. And what we're having now is a lot of opinions and ideas that don't really fit with the real world outcome. Now, it's important to know that I'm not in the category of people who believes that COVID vaccines didn't have a place. I always said that they should have been reserved for the high risk and those who didn't previously have an infection, because if they already had natural immunity, none of our standard scientific practice is therefore to vaccinate somebody who already has immunity. But that's now called hybrid immunity. But again, a completely separate discussion. The point being, where we are now in 2025, there is no point arguing about what you thought could have happened. Now we want to know what actually happened. And in highly vaccinated regions, mortality, all cause mortality, still remains elevated. That's a red flag. And the question is then, why is this not being addressed? And I'm going to play another part of this clip to show you where I think the issue is. This is an important point for you to reflect on when you understand why it appears that questions that are obvious to everyone else are not actually being addressed. Listen to what Aaron Siri says again.
I will, since I'm running out of time, I'll just wrap up by saying this. Um, um, uh, you might say, well, okay, the pharmaceutical companies did that, but why would the FDA allow it? It's because, unfortunately, our federal health authorities are hopelessly conflicted. Congress gave them conflicting structural duties. They're responsible for promoting vaccines and for defending them in the Vaccine Compensation Program. And you also ask them to be responsible for safety. Those conflict. One has overtaken the other. And for the most part, based on our over 2,004 requests to federal health agencies over the years on behalf of our client, I could tell you, our federal health agencies act like partners with pharma. They not only encourage their inroads, they act basically in the shoes of pharma, because when the immunity to liability was given to the pharmaceutical companies, Congress recognized that apparently and transferred all the safety functions to HHS and the mandate for safer childhood vaccines. And by doing so, it's made them hopelessly conflicted. That was very, very quick way to try and convey the regulatory and economic framework into which COVID-19 vaccines fell into, and why, from the pharmaceutical and FDA's perspective, the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials may have been robust, and they were compared to childhood vaccines, but compared to drugs or anybody that actually wants to assess safety, they absolutely were not robust. They were incredibly anemic. And as for post-licensure, regulators didn't do their jobs, but really they acted like pharmaceutical companies seeking to cover up harms and avoid reputational damage and financial liability.
At this point, again, he is very clear. And as I said, this gentleman specifically is very, very adept at challenging pharma and the associated organizations around liability. So he really knows what he is talking about. But to emphasize the point, when we look carefully at what happened in the pandemic, if you are going to point fingers, you will end up pointing it at regulatory agencies. But the regulatory agencies are very well connected with those who will do the investigations to understand the issues. And so then you have this very strange conflict of interest, which makes it difficult for anything to go forward. Additionally, when you looked at what happened with regards to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, The NIH in the United States, a significant proportion of funds was paid into them because of royalties. We're talking over 700 million US dollars. And so it is in everyone's interest for this to work. That's a problem, because what it means is that the narrative and the questions are very challenging to push forward when the answers, if they are negative, target the people who are then going to investigate it. This is the kind of situation that we have. It's kind of like when you want to investigate the police and the investigation is being done by the police. Many people don't trust the outcomes. And we have a similar situation here. This is what Aaron Siri was pointing out, is that the regulators and the vaccine compensation are still within technically a similar kind of body. It is no surprise that it is so difficult to make progress with these issues. So, as we come back to the basic premise, why is it that I keep on talking about these things? Why don't I just let it go? There's no issue at the moment. Even if there were mistakes in the past, everybody was well intentioned. You may say that, but here is the reality. My concern goes beyond what people did right or wrong. I am concerned about the clinical implications, because whatever happened, if autoimmune responses, that's where the immune system is triggered to attack itself, if that is part and central to what we're seeing at this point, there is a responsibility to understand it completely, because people's health and life in the medium to long term could be at risk. That's my view on it, and this is part of the reason why I don't let it go. I haven't seen anything over the 5 years of doing research around COVID-19 that would convince me that this is not a viral mediated autoimmune response to the spike protein, and looking out for ongoing spike protein autoimmune responses in an environment where the immune system has been primed and we have circulating virus. That, in my view, from a scientific and clinical point of view, is our most serious challenge. So I will keep on asking questions. I hope you like to listen to the answers. Have a great evening.